The real reason that most music producers struggle with making their own samples that they can either use, sell, or get placements with is because of this. Nothing. It's nothing. It's because they don't have a solid framework or game plan for even figuring out how to do it. So even if they watched a lot of tutorials and maybe even learned a few things, before you know it, a whole year is gonna go by and they still haven't made any progress. And don't get me wrong, tutorials can be great. I mean, I really wish there was some good ones around when I started. But by the end of this video, many of you are gonna realize that you've only been focusing on one of the key steps to becoming a high-level sample maker or even music producer. And luckily, you're also gonna learn the steps that I took to go from not being able to give a sample away to multiple producer placements, many of them with my own compositions, and multiple collaborations with companies like Loop Masters, Native Instruments, and Producer Grunt. So the first step you should take when you're trying to learn how to get good at making samples is learn how to analyze the music that you're trying to emulate. For example, if you're trying to emulate old school 70s songs, go and find 3 to 5 songs from the 70s that you really love, but that you've never critically listened to. And really listen to what they did in order to make the song sound the way that it does. One of the things that really shocked me when I started doing that was that even in the simplest of songs, there'd be instruments layered underneath other instruments that I never noticed before. And once I noticed that, another thing that helped me to realize is just how much those simple melodies and layered instruments work together to make the song still sound full. Speaking of instruments, let's talk about our next step in learning how to make our own samples, which is learn more about the vintage instruments that were used in the songs that you're trying to emulate. Now again, back when I started making music, there really wasn't that much helpful information online for how to do this. And sometimes when you did find something online, it was either behind a paywall, not that good, or both. But today, not only do you have access to a lot of information from the actual people who made the songs that you're trying to emulate, there are also free tools out there that you can use to simply ask.
All right, so obviously you can do this with Google, but here I am with the free version of ChatGPT, and I am simply gonna ask it what hardware synths were used by musicians in the 1970s. And here you go, a bunch of different synths, that easy.
So not only do you have access to tools like that, you also have a lot of plugin companies nowadays that are doing a really good job emulating a lot of the old hardware plugins and even effects that were used in the past. And now we get to hit the fun part. So now that you know what tools to use, your next step is gonna be to try to take that information and start putting it into action. And the best way for you to do that is to try to recreate a sample for yourself. And this is just something that you can do from time to time in order to test out your skills. Now remember, in the beginning, your goal isn't to try to make an exact replay or an exact replica of the original song. You just wanna see how close you can come and then develop from there.
That's what she said.
And this is actually a skill set that I use to help me keep a couple of my placements. So here we have a sample that I replayed a little while ago, and I'm gonna try my best to not get demonetized, but I wanted to give you guys an example of something that you could try to do. And now here's my sample replay. So once you learn how to make your own samples, the next step is for you to test your own samples. Because just like how you need to learn how to make space for an artist when they want to hop on a beat, you're gonna have to learn how to make them in a way that's complex enough that they'll sound good, but simple enough that a producer can take it and make it into their own unique idea. It can be really tempting to add as many different melodies and as many different textures as you possibly can. So one of the things that I started doing, especially when I started working on an idea that started becoming a little too complex, is I started turning my samples into full compositions with a bunch of different sections, so any producer that wants to use them can have options to pick from. And that'll really help you too if your goal is to sell samples and you want to sell a version that just has the compositions and then another version that has the compositions plus the stems. Because with the stems, a producer can basically take out whatever it is that they want or just use whatever parts of the sample they want. But with the compositions, if you give them different sections that they can work with, then other producers won't feel so constrained when they're working on your stuff. And that's going to lead us to our bonus tip, which is learn how to emulate real instruments. No, that does not mean that you have to learn how to play the piano just as well as George Duke or Robert Glasper or even John Legend. But you should take some time to learn how musicians actually play different instruments and then try your best to emulate that. One easy example for that would be if you're trying to emulate a real drummer, just remember the drummers don't have 8 hands. So I'm most likely going to do a more in-depth video explaining how to make your drums sound live. But for now, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what I usually hear when I hear a producer trying to make their drum sound live. And then really quickly, I'm going to show you what you should probably be shooting for. So here's a session for a sample that I made, and what I want you to listen for is whether or not you think that someone with 2 hands could play all of this at the same time on the drums. If you're trying to go for a more natural and realistic sound, you probably shouldn't have all of these drums being played at the same time. And now I'm going to show you what you should probably go for. All right, so now you can see that I got rid of the hi-hats and I kind of made a couple of changes to the drum MIDI. So now listen to what it sounds like compared to what it was before. So if you listen to the difference between this version and the version that I played before, this version sounds like someone's actually only using two hands. And if you notice, I didn't have to sacrifice any of the drum fills. Or if you add some strings to a sample, try to use some automation in order to make them sound more dynamic. So here we have some strings that I played in really quickly. The first one's gonna have no automation, it's just me playing. And then the second one's gonna have some automation attached to it. Now that sounds perfectly fine, but listen to the difference between that and this one. And like I said, the one without automation sounds fine, but when you add automation, especially if you're trying to do more cinematic sounding strings and make your strings sound more dynamic, that's one of the things that automation can really do for you. So now that you have a step-by-step framework for how to get better at making your own samples, if you want to learn how to use automation to make your samples sound more realistic and get the most out of your instruments, check out this video.